Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, with liquor shows, desolate shirts, spices, spasses, mean tunes, mean sex. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk about the Iraq situation in the big picture. And that is a discussion that's popped up in a couple of articles and that I've had discussions with some of my compatriots. And it's this idea that is the chaos that's being unleashed in Iraq now, is it the actual plan? And that the public surprise and shock at what's occurring in Iraq is just being feigned. And it's an interesting question. And certainly there's a lot of documentation available on this topic to kind of look over the idea. And I like looking at the idea just because it brings up one of the premier principles one always has to factor in all these geopolitical events and all these supposed clashes between nations and the layers of complexity in United States foreign policy and its interaction with Saudi Arabian foreign policy and Israeli foreign policy, generally on the same page, but we've seen some fractures lately in that relationship and just the shifting power structures moving towards the east and into Eurasia and the Caucasus, and just this point we find ourselves in, and so we can never really be sure, and that's one of the reasons why I try not to be. I'm confident of my views, but I never try to be self-righteous about what I may predict or what the outcome may be, because we really have no way of knowing what the real agenda is. We can speculate, we can peel back layers of the onion and think we have a clear view of the agenda, but a lot of times it's really hard to say because the layers of it can be so deep, or the distractions so effective, and the decoys so efficient. So let's look at the facts. Where do we find ourselves now in Iraq? How could it be a coincidence that we find out that some of the countries that the United States is concerned about in foreign policy now all have destabilized countries next door? So we have a destabilized Afghanistan right next to Pakistan, which is a U.S. foreign policy concern. We have a destabilized Iraq on the border next to Iran, which is a U.S. foreign policy concern. We have a destabilized Ukraine on the border next to Russia, a U.S. foreign policy concern, and we have a destabilized Libya next to Egypt in a foreign policy concern. And then, as we also know, we have the destabilization of Syria and this whole dynamic between Saudi Arabia and Iran playing out, and the complexities of the fact that now we have this force in Iraq and Syria, ISIS, who have created this new caliphate, who have been trained, funded, and armed to a great extent by the United States. And it's kind of interesting that we find ourselves now facing them, and they are military strategists, not just terrorists. And another reason why we might be able to assume that the chaos that's being unleashed in Iraq now is part of the plan is because the Kurds warned Baghdad and they warned the CIA a year ago that this was going to play out this way, that ISIS was building up for a major surge in that region, and nothing was done. And so that kind of feeds into the idea that this perhaps is part of the plan. Another part of that is the whole way that the United States dismantled Iraq during the occupation. It was almost as if they wanted to create a failed state. Because not only do we have all the years of sanctions previous to that, but then once the United States occupied Iraq, they dismantled the army, one of the biggest mistakes the entire post-war period, dismantled the police, the infrastructure was completely destroyed, the education system was destroyed, the entire middle-class bureaucracy was removed in debathification, so all the professionals who knew how to run a country were removed, roads, bridges, electrical plants, water facilities, museums, and schools were destroyed. So if you look at your classic destabilization techniques, certainly that string of events would qualify as destabilizing. And then we can also look back at all the roadmaps and blueprints we've seen over the years that point to the very complexities we're seeing play out in the Middle East and North Africa, and that includes the Project for a New American Century, and the Clean Break article, and any number of things that the big insider players like Brzezinski and Kissinger have talked about. And then we also have the Peters War College map, shows a completely redrawn Middle East with completely different borders and independent Kurdistan. And we always have to remember, too, that destabilizing that region for the U.S. and Israeli strategic interests, not only does that region provide bases for the United States military, but it's also what they call Israel's strategic environment. And therefore, U.S. and Israeli strategic interests are to have any of these formidable military challengers, organized challengers, states who sponsor proxy armies in other countries like Syria and countries like Iran, and Israel needs to have them neutralized, and they don't really mind the chaos. They're used to dealing with that, and they can deal more effectively with jihadis, I suppose, in the field. And we've also had a lot of school of thought besides U.S. Foreign policy think tanks who have talked about partitioning a country like Iraq, and including various Jewish scholars, and Michael Leedon, who said that, quote, "Stability is an unworthy American mission. We do not want stability in Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, or even Saudi Arabia," unquote. So the Israelis certainly know how to make themselves clear as far as what they desire in foreign policy, and it couldn't be much more clear than that. And many other Jewish scholars have also talked about the benefit of destabilization for Israel. And of course, destabilization works well for Saudi Arabia as well. The more you can create smaller players out of everyone else, the bigger a player someone like Saudi Arabia becomes. And so we have Qatar and Saudis and funding groups like ISIS. So there's another player, Turkey, working with the Free Syrian Army and creating that whole situation. So we have all these outside players that have had a lot to do with what's turning into a destabilization of not only Syria but Iraq. And it's hard to believe that they're all that inept. And that brings up another interesting aspect of this. As you discuss these sort of situations, as you look at it, whether it's incompetence or poorly planned, and the antithesis, maybe this is exactly a very complex plan that's working very effectively. And I guess that's the main point I want to bring up, talking about theories as to whether it's planned chaos in Iraq, because there's certainly a lot of politicization and opportunist politicians out there using this to talk about incompetence and making charges against each other, and all the old Bush cronies that were architects of the war coming out now and trying to justify their insane policies. So, but anyway, let's get back to the story. So then we also have, of course, the Wesley Clark list, and that was another compass to the future destabilization of all these regimes. A regime change was planned for all these countries, and Iraq was one of them, and perhaps there's another layer of regime change to go in Iraq. And we're actually seeing now that the United States is throwing Maliki under the bus and calling for an inclusive government, and so far Maliki has refused to So this could very much complicate the situation, and things could end up badly, even more badly for everyone concerned, for what we see. And this whole big umbrella, of course, is just a version of the new colonialism. This is how the new colonialism works, and using a lot of the same methods that the old colonialism uses, which is divide and conquer. And you can also take these native populations, and if you treat one class of native population better than the other, it certainly causes stresses between those classes and creates a lot of this sectarian strife. But let's get to one last thing I want to say about this whole idea of planned chaos in Iraq, and this has been unleashed with the outcome that we're probably going to see, which is the partition of Iraq, and then they will become three smaller states, and then independent Kurdistan dominating, which of course creates a buffer zone for Israel and is a trading partner with Israel. We now know that Turkish Kurdistan oil is going from Turkey to Israel now, and we know that Turkey now approves of a free Kurdistan, has a business relationship. They also appreciate the buffer zone. Netanyahu has come out in favor of a free Kurdistan. All the ducks are lining up, and it looks more and more like perhaps it's a planned demolition. But just one more theory to factor in. So I'm going to finish up with this quote from Thomas Harrington, and he said that, quote, "While there are some good articles on the chaos in Iraq, none of them consider whether the chaos now enveloping the region might, in fact, be the desired aim of policy planners in Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv. One of the prime goals of every empire is to foment ongoing internecine conflict in the territories whose resources and or strategic outputs they covet. The most efficient way of sparking such conflict is to brutally smash the target country's social matrix and physical infrastructure. There is an additional perk of justifying the maintenance and expansion of the military machine that feeds the financial and political fortunes of the elites. In short, divide and rule is the universal recourse in the imperial game, just as it was from Alexander to Caesar to now." Unquote. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.